Sometimes I've got a few comments saying I'm not enough of a truth teller. I don't expose X, Y, and Z. The truth is, when I try to publish, it can actually stop you from even putting the video live. And that's happened to me a few times. Also, on certain subjects, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it think, as it were. If people don't get it by now, nothing can help them. And the point of this channel is to help people who want to be helped, not to convince people what they should think. I mainly focus on fasting and its benefits in this channel. And for the people who do have issues, this can have surprising benefits. It also helped me a great deal, and the channel just sort of happened organically from my posting my list of benefits of fasting, which I started in early 2020. EMF is another subject that might not be enjoyed by the social media platform very much, but I think it's important to think about, especially in the modern age when we're completely surrounded by this stuff.
Finger tagged means I have been contacted by someone else on YouFace, the cutest girl at East Sadchester High School, class of 1976.
That's the year my mom was born.
Would you get us some pens?
A lot of viewers have bought the phototherapy bulbs I use recently. And in fact, I got 4 more of them myself this weekend. This is a good time to buy them, and I got a great deal, which is why I got more. Also be aware that 60% tariffs on China from the US are coming. And Europe usually follows whatever the US does, though it may not be as harsh. So if you want to get any tech doodads or some cheap clothing made by child slave labor, then this is probably the time to do it. You can ignore the wattage on the bulbs that is totally incomparable to the wattage on incandescent bulbs, or even those on fluorescent bulbs. It's an extremely powerful bulb, and if you look at some of the expensive brands, they give the exact same number of LEDs in a box, each at the same power, and then charge $600 to $800. So it's basically the exact same thing, just in a different container. That's why almost all the videos you see about phototherapy talk about these big brands.
I'm not the type to settle, you know? It's like when I go shopping. I have to have the most expensive thing. Not because it's expensive, but because it costs more.
These people have affiliate links and they make money off this stuff. And making a percentage off of $800 or thousands of dollars for the full body ones means that even one sale is going to make them $50, $100, or even more. You'll see the same tendency when it comes to supplement affiliates. They usually concentrate on very expensive supplements like Inamin and resveratrol, and sometimes even more expensive supplements that are just complete scams. I don't have anything against affiliate links to good products, and thanks so much everyone who purchased supplements through the links this weekend. However, most of these phototherapy devices are just massively overpriced. You could even buy LEDs individually and make something yourself, and people don't realize the actual LEDs would only cost them a few dollars if they just made it themselves. You can even get much more powerful LEDs these days, though it really is the total output that matters and not the power of the individual LEDs. These bulbs are also marketed as extremely low EMF, so the price, power, and low EMF are why I use them. But people are free to use whatever they want. I don't make any money from it, and I'm not here to convince people of anything or to prove anything to anybody. The same goes for fasting. Some people demand endless proof, but I don't care about any particular person doing it or not. My mission is just to make sure people are aware that I've benefited, and many others have, for a variety of conditions, and let people try it themselves if they care to and if they can. People mainly do it because nothing else is working, and they almost always have great results when they do try. I give more studies per video than any other channel on the subject, but you have to actually read for yourself if you want to know more. You're also going to need a lot of background education in science. You can also learn that on your own, but it takes a lot of time. At the end of the day though, you can only either try things or not. You don't really have to know anything except whether it's helping you with your issues. And the best way to get other people to try it, if you have people in your life who you think it could help, is to do it yourself and then say what results that you got. And you might be surprised that you get results for things that you just assumed were impossible to do anything about. That was the case for me and my sciatica, for example. That used to flare up all the time, and it wasn't a big deal, but it was just annoying. But the thing is, you get nothing for nothing, and fasting isn't easy. And if you're not even going to try it, you're not going to succeed at it. And it's going to be very difficult for the typical standard American diet grazer who has a fatty liver. The worse your metabolic health, the harder it will be. But once it's in good shape, it'll be easy. And that's why it may be better to just work up to it slowly over time. Start with a 36-hour fast and then go up from there. Almost all the so-called healthy people today also fall into this group. They think they're healthy eating a vegan diet or a pathetic bodybuilder chicken breast and rice diet full of arsenic with zero nutrients. But metabolically, they're a wreck. That's why fasting is hard, not because you look skinny on the outside. Your body has no idea how much fat it has in it. Even at 8% body fat, you have enough fat to fast for weeks and weeks. On average, fasts of 36 to 96 hours will yield nothing but gains in lean tissue and loss of body fat at the same time, along with stem cell release, accelerated healing, immune cell regeneration, the clearing up of plaques in the body, the creation of new T cells, thymus regeneration, and on and on and on. People have endless excuses for not doing the things they think will be hard and the things that make them feel slightly uncomfortable. Same thing if people don't want to spend $30 on the red light. To me, the benefits are pretty remarkable, and for the price it makes no sense not to at least try, especially if you have a sports injury or skin issues. So coming back to the main point of the video, the short answer is no. For phototherapy at least, EMF is just not that much of an issue. However, I do want to talk about EMF in general, and I think that as a general idea, it's much more of a problem. Red light and near infrared therapy, it really doesn't matter. First off, in theory, the bulbs I use should have negligible amounts. However, you can always get a defective capacitor, so if you're really paranoid about it, then getting a meter would be a good idea. In fact, one of the main reasons that people will promote getting these very expensive red light brands is due to the EMF. They are almost certainly literally using the same LED lights, which are all made in just a few factories in Asia. But in theory, they could be testing their products better than the cheaper brands. The thing is, they may not be as well. It could just be that whoever's making this stuff is pocketing an extra $500 to $600 per unit. And even if they are, the price difference is $30 to $40 versus $600 to $800 and thousands for the big units. And a good meter used to cost about $100 to $200, and I'm guessing it probably costs about the same today. So it would still be cheaper to order 10 bulbs and order a meter and then send any defective ones back. Then you'd have 10 times the power and still spend less money.
Oh, I like money. Can't believe you like money too. We should hang out.
The main reason I don't worry though is because the amount of EMS you're exposed to falls exponentially with distance because it radiates in all directions. So let's say your red light therapy device has very high levels of EMF at very close readings to the meter. Well, at 1 foot away, it's going to be about 1% as much. The exposure is also linearly proportional to the time the light is on. While you may use it for a few hours, 15 to 20 minutes is what's usually recommended. And if you want more power, it is much more practical to get more bulbs than it is to lay around for hours on end. So for phototherapy at least, I just think it's a non-issue. Unless you have a very bad EMF device and use it for a very long time, very close to your face or something like that, it's just not going to matter. Unfortunately, EMF all around you all day long is a much different story. Whether it's light, UV, gamma rays, or X-rays, EMF is all the same stuff at heart, just energy waves. When the wavelength is short, then it's considered intense. So an X-ray is very intense, and this also makes it very damaging. It is considered ionizing and will instantly start to damage DNA even at small amounts. That's because it's absorbed very quickly. Imagine that since it has more waves in a given distance, it has more surface area interacting with the object absorbing it. X-rays, gamma rays, and to a lesser extent UV rays are very obviously damaging. Just like how even minuscule amounts of aspartame are very damaging and they cause measurable DNA damage, these forms of so-called ionizing radiation damage DNA even in tiny amounts, and in fact your DNA is being damaged constantly every second of the day due to background radiation. Now going back to the aspartame, it's also true that you get a lot of damage and weight gain when you take saccharin, and most people don't realize that's true. So basically saccharin is kind of like these weaker rays. If you have lots of it over a long period of time, you still get the damage. But if you have the aspartame, even in tiny amounts, it's starting to cause damage. While it's generally considered safe by the authorities to be exposed to EMF in small amounts for a short period, and as long as it truly is small amounts and truly is for a short period, that's probably true. The ionizing radiation business comes up in the comments of every single discussion on the subject, and I believe this is either a paid PR campaign or else just repetition of workplace propaganda for people who work in industries where this matters. It's often guys saying, I've been working with it for 35 years, blah, blah, blah. Well, of course your employer is going to tell you your workplace is absolutely safe, at least if you follow the standard operating procedures.
They're not all historical documents. I mean, surely you don't think that Gilligan's Island is a...
Those poor people. Oh, brother.
In reality, the increased intensity of these types of radiation has no different effect except to act as though it's a higher level of intensity than the other types of radiation. That is, if you take a radio wave and you add more energy, even if it's a very low energy wave, if you add more actual power, electricity, then you're going to burn yourself. And if you've been around radio equipment, you know how true that is. In fact, it penetrates much more deeply because it expends less of the energy in a shorter time frame. So these radio waves can just go right through your body, whereas the UV can't do that. While corporations will say there's absolutely no possibility of damage from radio waves, logic and science tells us that it is the energy of the radiation multiplied by the frequency, multiplied by the total exposure time, that will dictate the amount of damage we're taking from EMF, such as radio waves, over time. As with the safe and effective treatments, it has legally been essentially mandated that wireless towers are not only free from harm that they may do to you if they do anything, but you're basically not even allowed to challenge the idea that they're completely benign. However, there's loads of data showing that people who live near these towers and any other kind of radio wave generators have greatly elevated cancer rates. Lately, people have complained about the 5th generation of these towers with hysterical tones, but in reality this form is easily blocked due to the high intensity, whereas the previous 4 generations are much more difficult to block and require more energy to push enough data, so they're really pushing out a whole lot of radiation, and basically you'd need a brick wall to stop it. That means they're probably actually worse than the new generation, but they probably all have issues no matter how strongly this is denied.
Look, it even melted all the little people and stuff. Oh.
Well, I suppose if it ever fell into the wrong hands, it could be modified and used as a weapon after a fashion. But that's true of almost any technology.
Earlier, I explained why I didn't worry about EMF for red light. And yet you should probably be worried about radio towers, in my opinion. They're just going to be much more of a problem because they're giving you much more total exposure. And this also applies to your router if you have wireless internet. So keep that in mind, and you may want to use wired internet instead. But if you're perceptive, then you probably already figured out that holding an electronic device against your ear all day is probably a really bad idea. And if so, then you win a gold star. I'm not a big fan of cell phones, and people often ridicule me over it, but there's some very good reasons for that. A cell phone today is kind of like a computer. It's about 1% as useful and completely locked down by the company you go through. It can also take pictures, but it's also about 1% as good as a real camera. The pictures are heavily digitally processed and they look quote-unquote good to the untrained eye, but in reality they're totally worthless for anything but selfies, and they can't really be distinguished from CGI, they're just so processed. Back in my school days, I met a guy who worked for the EPA when cell phone use was starting to take off. He told me of seeing endless cell phone shaped tumors and tons of tumors on the hip in the same shape because many people would carry them there at that time. He also told me they rejected all this evidence, and also that he decided he was never going to use one, and he suggested that nobody else would do so. And this was a highly educated guy whose opinion to me held some weight. I'm sure he's passed on by now because he was older than me, but I'll never forget that advice, and that seems only logical if you understand the basic science behind how they work, and I just can't see how anyone can paint it in any other way. You just don't want large amounts of EMF, and you don't want continual doses of moderate exposure either. The damage is just going to add up over time. And don't think this only applies to radios and x-rays or to EMF from electronics. It also applies to light. If you doubt my words so far and you only worry about the high intensity waves, just realize that it's actually UVB that does the most damage to your skin. UVB is only minimally ionizing at most. Even so, it does far more damage to your skin quality because it penetrates deeper. If you've ever had furniture that gets sun exposure for many years, you've probably noticed it is photo-aged and probably lost coloring over time as well. I would see that kind of thing at my grandparents' house all the time, both sets of grandparents, by the way. Now keep in mind that no UVC, UVB, or even UVA makes it through a window, so this is happening merely due to visible light radiation. In fact, if you park a car under very high intensity LED bulbs, such as those at a car dealership, the ones that put out large amounts of light, it will completely destroy the paint job in no time. And you can ask your own car dealership if they have one of those crazy signs, what happens when they park a car close to it. The paint will discolor, crack, and then peel in a matter of weeks. It's also recently been discovered that light can directly cause the evaporation of water molecules, and that's without the need for heating it. So you can imagine this will also have an effect on the human body. It also means we don't know nearly as much about the effects of light and radiation as we think that we do. This is also borne out by red light studies in mice. If too much is given, then the benefits dwindle, and eventually they stop, and ultimately it reverses and becomes harmful. Now with mice, it's very easy to overdose them because they're very small, and the light can pass through almost their entire body. But this theoretically applies to humans as well. So spending all day long under powerful LED lights is probably a bad idea. On the other hand, I did spend hours with the lamp pressed right on my shoulder back when I was recovering from an injury, and this seemed to help a great deal. So don't think you have to limit the exposure to the exact amount recommended on the device either. While EMF from red light and near-infrared devices is probably not a concern, it is much more concerning how much this is increasing in the environment. Due to the proximity effect of EMF exposure, It is also very worrying to have handheld devices pressed against our bodies all day long, and a holster or a case that blocks EMF when not in use is a very good idea. Phototherapy, aka photobiomodulation, is safe and effective and has an endless array of effects, including some very surprising ones, so it is worth a try even for things you might not think can possibly be changed.
4 years ago, again, I was quite struck when I received this email from a friend and colleague in Italy, Dr. Piero Romano, who had tried photobiomodulation and showed me an incredible progression of improvement in fine motor skills, which was paralleled by better behavioral control and mood regulation. So this child was asked to draw the portrait of her doctor. And here she was at the beginning of the baseline, and then 14 days later after treatment, then at 28 days, and then after 2 cycles. But this is not the only case. Another child was asked to draw this spiral, and this was before the treatment, and this is after the treatment. After speaking with Piero, my jaw literally dropped and kind of locked there when I heard the things he had to say. Not only it was safe and no adverse event had occurred, but the cognitive function of these children had improved overall steadily. School performance had improved, socialization, speech flow, motor function, even their growth. They were slightly higher than their peers. There were immunity likely benefits with less infections, and even the facial traits were less pronounced. That was astonishing.
Just be aware that light is also a form of radiation, and you can overdo it if you take it to the extreme.
You've been banging on your pots again, haven't you? I told you, if you keep on doing it, you won't have any pots left.